So first off, I just want to ask the audience a couple questions. Who here already works in biotech? Okay. Say like a good 50%. Who is interested or wants to get into biotech or start their own biotech venture? Okay, awesome. Got a lot of interested individuals. Okay, first I want to just ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So please just tell us where you work, what you do, and what got you into the biotech field, what really drew you to that area.
Hi, everybody. My name is Naheed Kurji. Proudly born and raised in Calgary, but was in Toronto for the better part of the past 20 years until most recently moving back to Calgary in July 2024. The better part of that 20 years in Toronto was at the intersection, building at the intersection of what was originally called big data predictive analytics for the discovery of medicines, which then turned into, in 2018 timeframe, AI for drug discovery, which has now turned into tech bio. The company that I founded in 2013 was called Cyclica. Cyclica was a small molecule drug discovery company powered by big data predictive analytics, AI, new age technologies. And in May of 2023, about 2 years ago, we sold Cyclica to Recursion Pharmaceuticals, a company that was also founded in 2013. On the biology side, hand in glove, great intersection. Recursion's doing some cool things, and we can talk a little bit more about that. Good to be back. Thanks.
Do these work? Can you?
Those are for later.
Oh, they're for later. Okay. Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Ricky. Just got into Calgary yesterday. It's like my 7th time here. I love the city. It's fun. I'll be back in May for InVentures. So excited to see some of you then. Toronto born and raised. I got into healthcare in general. Biotech's a part of our thesis. I lost a family member, my father, at a young age. And kind of got hyper obsessed about health span inequities. So in university, I was studying human bio and pharmacology. I went pretty deep on the brain in 3rd and 4th year, shifted into molecular and started studying zinc finger transcription factors in grad school. Was a little concerned about timelines in science, shifted gears into the device and pharma space, and was a quant analyst and a strategy consultant and a data provider for the global medtech pharma space. Went pretty deep into ortho, cardio, robotics, imaging, women's health, neuro, with majors and the SMEs. I realized sick care was a little over-indexed, and that we needed to spend a little bit more time on prevention and precision. So right around the same time, in 2012, and out of Toronto, I launched a big data predictive health company. We were kind of bullish on value-based care and Obama pushing it through. That didn't quite play out. But in the process, we built a very large data company and exited that to a Fortune 300 5 years later. Angel invested for a couple of years, and now I run Continuum Health Ventures. We're a tech bio health tech, aging biology, longevity focused venture capital fund based in Toronto, and my partner's in the Bay Area. So excited to learn about what you guys are working on.
I'm Deborah Crash. I'm a professor here at the University of Calgary. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Stream Neuroscience. Our journey began also about a dozen years ago. It's a point to note that it takes a long time to do all of these different ventures. And so we got a large grant to create a drug platform that would help identify new druggable targets. We thought that we maybe could go after how can we find new pathways that we hadn't considered, especially for neurological disorders for which new druggable targets were missing. And so we use this non-dilutive grant funding to develop out the platform tech, and then we founded Path Therapeutics as our first company, which then was to use this platform technology to commercialize these different druggable targets. We had a signed Series A term sheet back in early 2000s, 2023 actually, that we ended up walking away from for a variety of reasons, but one of which we didn't like the direction it was going. We went back underground, and then we developed one of our targets. We have into a small molecule therapeutics drug discovery program, and then we've just recently emerged in fall 2024 as Stream Neuroscience, and it's for to advance this therapy into the clinic. And so we're all focused now on how to get this small molecule therapeutic actually into clinical trials.
Okay, so you guys have all played some role in bringing either a biotech or health tech venture to market or helping other ventures scale and commercialize. So I'd like to know a bit more, what was it like in that process of bringing a biotech or health tech venture to market? What was the process of scaling and commercializing, and what challenges did you face?
How about we start this way first?
Well, I haven't brought anything to market, so I think I'm a bad person to start. I think from my perspective, it's a long haul of bringing things to market, trying to get past the hurdle of the IND enabling studies, as they're called, which is all your preclinical testing, and to file an IND. And so, I think that in my situation anyway, it's not giving up along the steps of actually getting a drug, a development candidate that can be moved forward into the clinic. And so there's hurdles that are faced, I think, on that preclinical testing I can speak to, but not necessarily the question you asked.
My personal journey scaling our startup, I think the early day challenges was we were off on thesis. We were really, really hoping that value-based care would come through, payers would get away from fee-for-service, and they would benefit from all these analytics that we were building up. So recognizing when to pivot, and we did that very early. I think 8 months into the business was, I think, critical to some of the success that we had. But it was tough because we spent a year in stealth mode thinking about how important this was. So understanding the market dynamics that we could not predict for, and having a finger on that pulse, I think, mattered and it was helpful in the success of moving that forward. It's a grind, as mentioned earlier. We were competing with two very large conglomerates, one which IBM Watson ended up buying, and the other a company called IQVIA. IQVIA had 55,000 employees globally. We were sub 20, but with a lot more compute. So we had to figure out how to use that compute to our power. And I think that was a big reason we were able to differentiate from the existing folks. On the biotech side now, as a VC, we've invested in a couple of companies. Two of them preclinical. We invested 2 years ago in a company that was preclinical. They've now got 2 phase 2 approvals. They've done it in a relatively short period of time, partially because they had a deep thesis on translation and why the asset they were going after mattered. So I'll talk about them more later, but I think it's just really important to have a map of everything you can control, and then to map the things that you can't control, and to spend a lot of time thinking about those things as well.
Yeah, excellent answers. I'll try and drill down into some key learnings over 12 years of building Cyclica and making many more bad decisions than we made good decisions. And if I were to create a mental model of time and value, right? Time, obviously X, value Y. People expect more over time. I put in effort, there's a Z-axis clearly there, that I'm gonna create value. And what was a very humbling first 4 years of Cyclica was we were super excited to be a pioneer in this new category of big data predictive analytics. I'm going to use that terminology because in April 2013, there was a paper written by McKinsey & Company titled How Big Data and Predictive Analytics Would Revolutionize the Pharmaceutical Industry. No talk of AI. There's 9-10 companies that really started in this space. So if I go back to 2010 and give a company called Numerit a shout, they're now called Velo. There's a very small cohort of companies that were in this big data space. And we thought if we just grinded away enough that we would create an immense amount of value. And what we were humbled by, punched in the nose many, many times, was it's just a clusterfuck of complexity. Especially when you're in the intersection of medicines and patients and genetics and biology and chemistry. And now you're bringing in these new models to do predictions faster and try and supercharge the way in which humans do things. So the first thing for us was, what was the problem that we're really looking to solve? Does that problem have market penetration opportunity? And if you penetrate, is there value? Are you solving something that people want to be solved? Or are you solving an academic exercise that academics are really interested in the lab? And in our case, for those scientists here, the problem that we were looking to solve was small molecule drug discovery, not for one biological target and doing like a target-based drug discovery effort, but flipping the problem on its head and saying, for a small molecule, could we identify all the biological targets that it was interacting with? Polypharmacology. And we got into this really cool space, like that's awesome, nobody's doing this. phenotypic screening, target deconvolution, for those of you who are in the space that kind of know this. And from a commercial standpoint, we did deals with GSK and Takeda and Merck and Otsuka and you name it, we did some work for them and nobody gave a shit. It did not matter. We got paid, but from a value standpoint, there's like this ceiling. Like, did we want to service the industry and get into these contracts for a few $100,000, do revenue of millions of dollars, whereas the value they were extracting. So one of the big lessons for me, going all the way back then, which if I fast forward to today, now that I've been out of Cyclica for 2 years, and while I was the president of Recursion Canada and got to see how they built out their Canadian operations, which is now 150 people, got to see how another company thinks about these problems. And now kind of sitting on the sidelines, doing a sabbatical, spending time with my family. Ricky and I have made an investment in a company together. I'm primarily spending time now investing in health tech, biotech companies, but importantly, who have an appreciation of understanding, does the dog hunt? What is it hunting for? Who cares about it? And how are they going to extract value? And I can spend a little bit more time talking about that, but I just wanted to give you a lesson of really, really honing in on why the thing that you're working on or want to work on or want to build matters in the grand scheme of all the other things that are being worked on. Because at the end of the day, you need to go to a Ricky or a VC and you need to pitch them across a portfolio of opportunities why yours is the best that they're going to look at. And I didn't get that probably until 6 years into the journey.
Okay, I like what both Ricky and Mahid mentioned. Both keeping like a pulse on the market, really trying to see what the market needs. And Mahid, you said, trying to find a problem that really needs fixing. What do they really need? Are we just creating a solution that no one really asked for? So now I'd like to ask, what do you think are, or what's one trend in biotech or health tech that you see that I think we should focus on, maybe we should do some more work on? If you had to name one, how do you think it'll shape the next decade of biotech or health tech?
So I'll answer that one, but just quick step back. 90% of the money in AI drug discovery went to small molecules. So the trend that we're seeing is that's no longer the case. Biologics, peptides, oligonucleotides, there's like a whole host of modalities and different targets besides proteins. So that's certainly something that has happened over the past few years. So it's not just small molecules anymore. But I'd say the recognition that a point solution to a complex four-dimensional map of drug discovery and saying, I'm going to solve this one thing along this massive pathway of what it's going to take to bring a drug to a patient is copacetic and sufficient enough to drive immense value is a failed thesis. You look at all the great companies or the companies that are aspiring to be great, they're building complete technology flywheels. From modality, from preclinical testing, from biological insights, having their own physical animal model studies, having a clinical pathway and clinical teams, and having technology be the basis of, or data science be the basis of, all the key decisions that they're going to make along that pathway. Versus, I'm a small molecule target identification company, or I'm a disease focus, I'm going to focus on this one target, I'm going to try and sell that biological target to somebody to do work on. That's a failed thesis. I think it's taking a lot more time than it should have for companies to realize this. And again, the companies that Ricky and I look at, and one that we've invested in, has gotten that very quickly out of the gate, that they can't just be a biology focused company, that they need the entire soup to nuts approach, technology driven.
Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit with that approach. Because if I had gotten the microphone first, I would have said the exact opposite. And I would have said, you can't get away from biology. And so I think that's the trend that we're seeing right now, is that there's been a lot of big tech development, and that we have gone down generative AI as tools to identify pathways or molecules or polypharmacy, or whatever it is that different technologies are approaching. And there was a drop of biology for a while. And so when we had our platform technology company, some of these tech approaches were calling us saying, hey, we need to validate what we're finding in our computer models. And so you will never get away from the biology. And I think that that trend is actually coming back. I think that there's a trend back to the 1980s when we didn't have a lot of computational power and you had to do phenotypic screens. And so you had to rely on, I'm not really sure what the pathway is or what's happening, but I'm looking at some sort of readout in an animal system, and this is telling me that this pathway or drug or whatever I'm looking at could be informative. And so I think that we're starting to come back. I don't fully disagree in that there needs to be more of a combinatorial approach to how we think about this. But I do think that pharma is still fairly simplistic on what's the drug and what does it do, and they are moving out of the R&D space more, and there's more young and small biotechs that are coming into the space that is going to change that ethos. But there still is a drive and a need to understand the biology and how we are applying our technology in a biological manner. And I think that's an emerging trend.
My quick response to that is I fully agree. Biology was so strongly overlooked. Of those 10 companies, one was a biology-focused company. I don't think what she said put my chips behind that. What I was saying is, as a company with strong biology, you can't just build a great, valuable company with just one thing. You need to have an entire pipeline of tools, technologies, both wet lab, data science, the great teams, and think about what a great next pharma company is going to be, not just a solution to one thing.
So we invest a lot in the US. I'm debating if I should be wearing my US hat and make this a spicy panel or play the neutrality that we often do north of the border. Look, I think I agree with everybody here. I think we're kind of on the same page. If we don't get to first principles on biology, we're going to live in this very sick, chronic, diseased world that we currently live in. We've been doing biology for a long time. We have to do biology better, and I think technology is going to allow us to do biology better. We do have to get to core understandings of mechanism of action that we haven't seen before. We do have to understand multiomics like we've never seen before, and this is the first time where we can start to do that. We can go beyond, our proteome and our metabolome and our microbiome and our genome now, and we can actually start to look at what's happening outside of our bodies, all the epigenetic factors and lifestyle impacts that we have from our sleep and how those are impacting our biology, to our sweat and how that's impacting our biology, to our food and our lifestyle and our lethargic lifestyles for most people. So I think we're in a stage for the first time in human history where we can start to take all of the wearables. You can only see I have 3 on right now, but there's more going on in here, and mix them with the data that sits in our clinical systems, and mix that with the vast amount of information that's being published, with a big focus on removing bad science from these large sorts of data that we are ingesting through our tech focus models, and start to build a comprehensive and much more complex understanding of who we are. We're very complex, and symptomatically alone or looking at a single asset down a single path is just not good enough, because we're systems biology, and we really treat ourselves in a very isolated way. I hope that changes.
Yeah, I think you all pointed to some of the struggles that the biotech and health tech industry faces, whether it's, hey, we need to focus on the science, but we also want to diversify and expand, and we need to make sure that we're accurate. So now I'd like for you guys to switch the narrative. Instead of like a trend or opportunity, what challenges does the biotech or health tech field face? Maybe that's different than other areas. And how should we perceive these challenges or barriers and overcome them?
Not a joke. How much time do we have? Just curious. I just want to make sure I don't go too.
You guys have, yeah, like
30, okay. So I'll start with one really big one, and it's timely. There are certain geographies on the planet, I won't name them, but if you're on any news cycles, you've probably figured it out, where science funding is being cut. I think if we fundamentally look at the amplification of that, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we are going to see gaps in basic science. And those gaps in basic science are going to lead to gaps in translational science, and they're going to lead to bad things. Ultimately, my hope is that other countries will step up and they will, pick up the problems associated with this lack of funding, or we'll see some administration changes where we re-spend the money in the right places. The list can go on and on and on. If we keep doing science in the way that we've done it, if we keep incentivizing publications over real science and tenure over real science, we're going to have a problem. It's a reproducibility problem. We have it. We can go back 30 years into clinical trials and publications to realize how much bad science is confounding the work that we're spending time on. So I'd like to see better, good science, deep science prevail. Funding matters, but so does the incentives that we have within universities and academic cycles for tenure.
I don't mean to disagree, but I think that there's a lot of good academic published science that is real science.
I think there's a lot of good science too. I'm
It's
just saying
still
we have
real
to,
science.
We have to separate good and bad science. That's
Yes.
all. It's all kind of lumped together.
I don't disagree. I think that there's a lot of, there's a study that Nature, I think, did years ago now on the cancer field. And they said, okay, $1 trillion has been spent largely by academics on cancer biology research. And what have we gotten for it, basically? And then they went through all these different publications and they showed that all these high impact Science, Nature, Cell publications weren't reproducible at this really alarming level. And it really opened the eyes that, all these gobs of money had been spent and not a lot came out of it. So the point's not lost. I think that the academic community spends an awful lot of time trying to figure out this puzzle. I think that if there were an easy solution, it would have been cracked by now. When I was at UCSF in San Francisco, it was an era where they were opening up the lab books to pharma, and so they had gotten a $1 billion deal with GSK, I think maybe it was Pfizer at the time, and basically for their $1 billion, they got access to everybody's lab notebooks, and anything that they found that was interesting, they could commercialize. And so this was a big cash windfall for the university, and it was also a way for the solution to the problem was that, okay, there's a lot of good research that's being done in all of these labs at San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco, but the PIs don't quite know how to commercialize, or they can't see the diamond in the rough, and so pharma's going to come in, they're going to see it, and they're going to be able to take it forward, and a big fat nothing came out of it. And I think it's partly because, I don't know if you've looked at a lab notebook recently, but that's probably the biggest problem. But the other part of it, I think, is that it's not that simple, because science is very slow, it's very laborious, and it's almost like it has to be directed from the beginning of, I'm going to do this project because I think it could be commercializable, instead of, we're going to do hypothesis-driven research and let's just kind of see where we end up. I think those are two very different avenues. And so something that I say around the University of Calgary, if people talk to me enough, is that UCalgary is the entrepreneurial university, right? We're very proud of that, and we start more startups than any other university in Canada. And I think that there's a lot of benefit that comes from that ethos that we've created. But they make it sound like everybody's an entrepreneur. And I think that one of the solutions to the problem that you articulate is not that it's academic science bad, focused science is good. I think it's, let's identify those professors that are kind of more drawn in a business sense. Let's invest in them heavily. Let's take them out of the CHR grant cycle, right? So if you take me as an example, I've been thinking about commercialization for a long time, but the only way for me to get money is to go to CHR. And if I go to CHR, I have to come up with a hypothesis-driven project about what I'm really trying to commercialize. And if I don't go to CHR, then I'm being offered like $20,000. And let me tell you, $20,000 doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. So there's a gap between these two options. And so I'm trying to fit my commercialization into the current funding mechanisms, which slows me down because I got to get all the peer reviewers to agree with what I'm trying to do, which I'm really kind of masking what I'm trying to do, but just trying to make them happy with what I'm trying to do. And so I think that there needs to be streams. I think university can get to streams where you are a phenomenal scientist and you're our tenure track scientist and you're going to publish our science papers. And you're our phenomenal entrepreneur and you're going to be our CEO, our co-founder, and you're going to go start companies and you're going to bring impact to the university that way. And they start to identify these two phenotypes and they invest in these two phenotypes differently. And I think that's one way that you can start to get at that problem.
That's a great solution.
I have so many questions, but since I have to talk this way,
Yes, we can get a drink later.
I've never thought about this question before. And I've been thinking for the past few minutes. I still don't have a cogent idea. But if I were to come back to one thing that biotech companies continually struggle with, I'm going to say, like, not the single asset biotech company that's looking to advance an asset to the clinic and then hopefully get that clinical asset to a de-risk stage that they can partner it off or do whatever they need to do with it. I'm thinking about kind of like the neo-biotech, the world that I understand a little bit more, which is technology-driven biotech. And still to this day, I can't think of a company, this is being recorded, right?
It is, yeah. But we can cut anything out.
That's what's going up on the social media.
Notwithstanding the excellence of the company that acquired mine, I can't think of any other company that has figured out commercialization of their technology. There's been this pendulum shift over the past 13 years. 100% of the quote-unquote AI drug discovery companies tried to build a service-based model where they would go and do pilot projects with pharma companies and they would service. They built platforms. We had a user interface and we spent millions of dollars on a technology that no longer is used by anybody. And it's because we thought servicing the industry that's making the medicines was the right approach. Like we have a technology, let's go help Blockbuster sell more, CDs and VHSs and all this kind of stuff instead of thinking about Netflix. And that was kind of the industry. We're so consumed about the technology, we didn't think about commercialization. And then you have this fracture where a bunch of people realize, well, the real value accrues to those companies that own the underlying IP of the asset that is being worked on. And so you had a few companies, Atomwise and Silico Medicine, Exscientia, Recursion, and Cyclica that became kind of tech bio focused. Let's build portfolios of assets on the back of our technology. Let's shut down the pipe of service-based models and let's forego the revenue that would come from that. But now we have to go raise an obscene amount of capital to go advance these assets into preclinical and to clinical studies. So what ultimately then happened with this kind of capricious attitude on commercialization is our funding changed. And the investor archetypes went from technology first, disrupt or augment an industry. We understand technology, we understand SaaS, we get these lumpy sales cycles, we understand CAC and LTV and this and that, the other, to now having them on your cap table but saying, hold on a second, we're going down preclinical studies and we're going to advance this to the clinic and we need to raise a couple $100 million. Well, my goodness, does that change the conversation? But then also you have to appeal to a totally different archetype of investor. And those investors don't really understand the technology. And so there's like this dead zone of 4 years where everybody struggled, besides a few companies with some really thoughtful investors who were saying we're going to live at that intersection, but a vast majority did not speak the same languages. So if I think about one of the big challenges is who was doing what and at what zone were you appealing to what type of investors? And still to this day, I don't know if anybody's really figured this out. There's some great investors, early stage, hyper innovative investors like Continuum and a few others. There's some late stages like Dimension Capital, Lux Capital, many others, but they're few and far between. And so to the question of what does a biotech company have to struggle with that no other industry really does, we're not B2C. Kind of either B2B or you're building an asset that hopefully is going to be partnered off with, or you go B2C at some point in time, but you have to raise an obscene amount of capital. I think that struggle is a real struggle that has not yet been solved.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with my work with Nuclei, having a service-based or platform-based company, it's a lot harder to raise capital rather than having your own assets that can really prove your science. And again, with Deborah, with what you said, sometimes scientists struggle to also be an entrepreneur. They can't be both sometimes. So yeah, they can definitely feel torn and they don't know how to get this information when they've only ever known science. And how are they supposed to be an entrepreneur now?
Would you mind if I add one anecdote?
Yeah.
I think this is a super salient anecdote. Back in 2020, March, COVID hit, world goes upside down. March 21 is a Monday. Did sleep over the weekend because on Monday we were supposed to get a signed term sheet for our Series B. Fortunately, the investors doubled down, said, we're good, we got you, we went on to build. COVID happened, the world's kind of figuring things out, a lot of liquidity, SPACs up the wazoo. And so the pendulum completely shifted, which is go big, go bold, grand slams. We have so much money, we're going to fund everything. And then what happened in 2022 timeframe, and then early part of 2023, complete shift of attitude. So you build a company to satisfy these needs that your investment market, we shouldn't have to do this. We did it, it was a mistake. And we became like, we pendulum shifted. That's where the money is? Okay, let's actually shift our narrative and go build something, tell this big, bold story. And not unlike what's happening in the market right now, where you can't actually pin truth and like plan around it. What happened in 2022, 2023? Every biotech investor who said we're really interested by technology-driven biotechnology was like, give me your farthest along clinical stage asset. I remember sitting in a room with a prominent Canadian life science VC, whose name I will omit, and they said to me, show me a phase 3 clinical asset and we'll put some capital into it. Phase 3 clinical asset, and what's your check size? $5 million. Why would I want $5 million if I had a phase 3 clinical asset? The entire risk paradigm shifted. And what then happened? That capital pool completely closed. And I think biotech faces that. You look at the XBI, you look at all publicly traded biotech companies, it's just a really tough and very, very volatile industry to be in.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you for that anecdote. But yeah, I like the fact that you're jumping in. I also wanted to say to all the panelists, feel free to jump in. I want this to be very conversational. You can ask each other questions if there's something that you'd like to know a bit more about. But I have some more specific questions now for each of the panelists based on what you guys do. I'll start off with Deborah. You have a lot of experience in the Calgary biotech ecosystem specifically. So where would you say Calgary's drug discovery ecosystem is right now, and how can we support its growth?
Well, it's very nascent, is where it is right now. I was recently informed that there are 2 small molecules that have come out of Alberta that are FDA approved or Health Canada approved. Shout out for getting that data pulled together. And so, I think that speaks to where small molecule therapeutics are in Alberta itself. We do pretty well with devices and we do well with diagnostics, some AI. There's obviously a lot of strength in AI, especially out of Edmonton. And so I think that in particular, the small molecule therapeutic space has lag behind. And part of it is an investor problem. Because it's a long road. It takes a lot of money and it's a long road and it's highly risky. And so people want to open their checkbooks. Our local investor pool is used to, writing a check for $100,000 or $200,000 at a really early seed stage, and maybe $1 million once we get to a Series A. I had a conversation just last week with an investor, and an Alberta-based investor, and not in the biotech space or in the small molecule space. And I said, we're looking to do something small. I don't want to go out and do the big raise again. I've done it. I didn't like it. It took us in directions that were a waste of our time. I want to do a very small raise to get to the inflection point, and then I want to see where we're at that inflection point, and then I'll figure it out again. And so I said, I want to do something $5 million or less. And they were like, well, that's the biggest raise we've ever seen. And I was like, well, that's nothing. Let me tell you, you got to get that pencil sharpened because it only goes up from there quickly. And so I think there's just an education that needs to happen. The money is the biggest problem. Again, I already said, the University of Calgary wants to give me $20,000, and it's like, it's not even worth me trying to fill out your stupid application for $20,000. Like, it's not even a fraction of my monthly burn rate. That's not happening. So I think that I think there needs to be an education on the dollar amount, especially on small molecules. It takes $1 million to do some non-GLP testing, which basically is a dose-finding study and some LD50 experiments and some non-toxic selectivity. And then it's going to take about another $5 million just to go and do your GLP tox, which is now in clinical grade drug and testing. And that's not even including paying the consultants to file the IND with the FDA or with Health Canada, and then starting the clinical trials. And so it's a very expensive grind, and there's a very big valley of death, particularly in Alberta, because there's a disconnect, I think, with how much it really costs. And the dollar amounts scare the investors off. And then, so that's the first problem. The second problem is that investors aren't used to this space, and so they don't know how to do due diligence. I always know who I'm talking to right away when I go through just my quick non-confidential deck, and they say, you know, I'd like to give you some feedback on your deck, which I always think, okay, this isn't going to go well. Not that I can't handle feedback, but I think that they know something they don't. And then they usually proceed to tell me, you don't have a revenue slide. And I just think instantly, like, if you're asking me for my revenue slide, like, incompatible. Like, we don't speak the same language, so you will never see a revenue slide. If I have a revenue slide, it is so disingenuous, it's ridiculous. So I think there's just a general education of what they can expect to see at a company that's pre-IND filing and what that looks like. I think that we have to chip away at it because, like with any ecosystem, as companies exit, trickle-down talent starts to occur. Right? You start to have the technicians who can do the cell-based assays. You start to have specialists that can do some of the computational tools. You start to have the VCs, the angels who have exited, and so they have some money in their pockets and they can help seed and they speak the language. Then there's the mentoring, there's the executive suite people. Like, all of this can start to trickle down if we can get some of these companies that go out. And so I think that's the number one priority, at least in my perspective, for the Alberta-based ecosystem is let's identify a couple small molecule therapeutics that we think can go the distance and have that create talent locally that can then fuel more. And I think in the absence of that, we continue to be an oil and gas town. We continue to be a health tech and devices and diagnostics town, which is faster return, smaller checks. You can get to the clinic faster. Still a long road, still expensive, but a little bit different game than a small molecule therapeutic. So I'd like to see some successes locally.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
But just one comment. 20 years ago, 40 years ago, Calgary is an oil and gas town. To see there's healthcare and life sciences here, I'm so impressed. And like, I think it's super cool. So much more to be done. You said 2 small molecules that have entered the clinic or have been approved?
Approved.
Okay. Do you know how many, I think your hand went up with sharing the data. Do you know how many have been approved in Ontario? Or Quebec? No. I don't think it's that much more.
Really?
I would, like,
Even in Quebec?
I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Maybe Quebec because of Admari and that network. But it's not 10 times. I venture it's not even 2 times. I don't know if you know that.
If only we had a GPT that could answer that question in a couple of milliseconds. Anybody? Anybody?
But what I'm trying to get at is there's something special here that we can look at other places. And I think Vancouver, there's something really special happening. And not to shit on the parade that is Toronto and the center of the universe, but I don't think this city, at least in 8 months of being here trying to build, I'm seeing any less momentum than is happening there. And I love the free lane, so I totally agree with everything, but I don't think 2's so bad. Oh, my question to you is, what would you do about tech transfer from the University of Calgary and to promulgate their incredible founder-first approach to other universities to solve some of the problems? Like, what's the big lesson that other institutions could learn from UC?
So I actually, I think university, so I'm from San Francisco, and I came out of the system where the university tech transfer office is very strong. And everything that you develop in the lab, they own. And as soon as you're going to commercialize it, it's kind of like the tech transfer police come in and they force you to put down your pipettes and they take away your Kim wipes and they say, back away, bitch. And you're like, oh my God, right? Like, it's this very strong event that happens. And the University of Calgary is like super fluid, let me tell you. So, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm in a dream because I do think the University of Calgary has a very generous approach to commercialization, partly because it's their dogma, it's their motto, their driving force right now is that they're the entrepreneurial university. They have the very unique situation where all inventions are inventor owned. And so when I first started fundraising a decade ago, I would go to the Bay Area because that's where I have a lot of contacts. And we would spend the first 30 minutes of any phone call arguing about that I need to go read my faculty handbook. Because clearly I don't understand the faculty handbook because it's preposterous that I would own the technology as a university professor. And I would tell them, I've read the faculty handbook, I know it's very unique, but it's a very but it's true. And they just wouldn't believe me. And they'd have to get their lawyers to read our stupid faculty handbook to find out, like, I can't believe it, but you're right. I'm like, I know. Can we start a conversation now? So I think that the University of Calgary is very generous. They let us own the technology, and they also have a strong tech transfer office. So if you want to go the tech transfer route and use them as a resource, you can do so. If you want to own it yourself and go it alone and pay for your own patent filing and pay for your own, kind of business setup, corporate lawyers, then you can do that too. And so I think that's very flexible. They're also very generous with how much you continue to commercialize within our lab setting, and it saves a tremendous amount of money. And so I get asked a lot, like, how have we gotten so far on the amount of money I've actually raised? And my shareholders are very happy because they haven't been diluted out, because I have the university that enables me to be able to do this work. It's all on board. There's conflict of interests that have been filed. And equity as appropriate has been assigned to the university. And so I think that in many ways, the University of Calgary has that very right, and it encourages the entrepreneurship. The only thing I would change slightly about the university, other than my point that I made earlier about maybe identifying streams, is that I think that they should measure, the metric is how many companies do we form, and I think that's the wrong metric. I think they should measure how many companies raise a significant amount, or how many companies meet their first inflection point, or 3 inflection points, or how many companies have an exit, although that's obviously quite longer down the road. I think if they had more back-end metrics that they defined their entrepreneurial success by, I think they would solve some of the problems, particularly around money and how do we get companies through the valley of death. I think they're more focused on how do we start the companies and how do we properly seed and fund them through leaving the university setting and actually being a full-fledged company is a very long path and a very hard, that's the most expensive money you're going to get because it's the biggest risk. And so how do you fund that? And I think if the university were to measure how many came through the valley of death, that we would solve some of the inherent problems still think exist.
I haven't studied the University of Calgary, but I'd love to learn more. I did have an opportunity to be part of a small group, and I'll keep this short because we're short on time, at the University of Toronto, where we were, through the Creative Construction Labs, where we were a subgroup of us, we're trying to analyze best practices in TTOs. And we looked down south, we looked at Stanford, we looked at MIT, we looked at some of the more innovative universities to understand models and wanted to see what we could adopt. My conclusion towards the end of that was that much like funding mechanisms, as I alluded to earlier, being somewhat antiquated and there's a lot of misalignments. Maybe there's a good solution on the 2 streams of types of, phenotypes of PIs. I think the TTOs, even the best in class, are still lacking an overhaul. And it's 2025 now, we're overhauling so many things. I don't think we should try to be the best at this system. I think the system just has to be rewritten. And I think there's a lot we can do to do that. And that was something that we learned.
Okay, so unfortunately we're pretty short on time, so I don't know if I should just jump straight into audience questions.
You can answer a couple questions, then we'll go to audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll just do a couple really quick questions, just one for Ricky, one for Katie. Okay, Nahid, with companies like Cyclica and Recursion, you've had AI be a core part of your business. Can you talk about this new category of AI in healthcare? What events marked key turning points in the 2010s, 2020s, and beyond? And is it being overhyped? And how can we properly utilize it moving forward?
And we're short on time.
Rapid response.
I don't even know where to start. So lots is happening right now. I think the companies that are proving themselves to be category differentiators, I don't think there's yet to be a winner fully. A winner is defined as one that could repeat a process of bringing a molecule to and through the clinic into patients and get some approvals. I don't think that certainly has not happened yet. There's been a lot of struggles. A lot of capital has gone into the space. Benevolent AI, check their stock price right now, struggle, raised billions of dollars. Velo raised a bunch of money, including from Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. Recursion Pharmaceuticals is probably now up to about $2 billion, 1.8. Exscientia raised a bunch of money. So a lot of money went into the space. I am excited to see what the outcome is. And that being said, the goalposts have moved on what the evaluation of these types of companies is going to be over time. The other, and I'm trying to be very succinct here, The category winners at the intersection of tech, bio are going to be domain experts who understand their biology, understand how to go after that biology, and appreciate and integrate data science techniques and are like multimodal in their team dynamics. That they're not just biologists, they're not just chemists, they're not just data scientists that are figuring out a way to use data to go do something. There's a deep empathy towards the complexity, but there's a deep appreciation that it doesn't have to be the way it was done before. I think those are going to be the category winners. I think it's going to take time. I think there's a few that are going to emerge, but it's going to come from a multifaceted team. So I don't know if I even answered that question because I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no, that definitely answered the question. So we need to focus on those diversified teams, and even if it's being overhyped, as long as we look at the result, maybe it's all really worth it in the end, right? Okay, Ricky, I'm not going to leave you out, so I have one more question for you. Really quickly, as an investor, what is one thing that you look for in a biotech company? And I'm sure there's probably not one thing, or a health tech company, and that differentiates, okay, yes, I want to invest, no, I don't.
So we have like this soupy cauldron of ingredients that go into our decision making. It would be really difficult for me to say one thing. There's just too many things we have to look at when making a decision. So if I could try to succinctly mention those, and a lot of, Nahid covered a couple of those in a very poignant way. The science is important. We talked about that a lot. Is it reproducible? Is it novel? Is it going to matter? Translatability, the clinical milestones. We need to analyze what's happening in preclinical. We need to see what's happening on the clinical side. We need to understand if they have clarity, these founders have clarity on regulatory pathway. If we think about team, which is like super ultra important, are they passionate? Are they polymaths? If they're not polymaths, have they figured out what their limitations are, and can they augment their team, as Nahid mentioned, to create a full stack? Are they, chasing the puck, or are they kind of predicting where it's going to go? How much are they leveraging technology today? We hear a lot more about N=1 companies. We're going to start to see the emergence of more billion-dollar N=1 companies. That's a slightly hyperbolic term, but I think the point to take home is that, are they leveraging the technology that's out there today? Are they helping to build it? Have they incorporated it into their processes? That's important. I think if team, if I had to model in another component that's just important to the early team, is who are their advisors? Who are their mentors? Have they taken figureheads from universities where the professor doesn't have a lot of time for the company, and they've stuck them on a slide deck? Or do they have active mentors that are helping them? Do they have experiences and fails that they can sort of help these early stage founders navigate through? Business models, obviously very important. We talked about single asset, we talked about platform, we didn't talk about it, but I think the hybrid of being able to own your own asset and also service pharma while you're still trying to raise money in the early days is very acceptable and seems to be working for this next generation of companies. How big is the market they're going after? 70% of our thesis is in tech, bio, and health tech. On the more biotech side, we're very much focused on aging biology. We have a company right now that's focusing on muscle sarcopenia. Every human after the age of 29 can start to see about a 3% degradation in muscle mass. Bump up to 50s and 60s and we start to see double digits. And if you're on a GLP-1, we can see a little bit more. So we want to go after markets that are going to impact human aging. For us, that's a big market. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be going after rare things. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be going after cardiovascular. We have an investment in that space as well. But we do want to make sure that the market is large. If it's the business, going back to business model, if it's a direct to consumer or a wellness and it doesn't need to go down regulatory, we care less about reimbursement and the types of codes that they're going to need to get paid. But understanding who's going to pay for this and why they're going to pay for this is super important. So we just love big, bold ideas with people who are pragmatic enough to think about how they're going to get to that finish line.
He was asked for one thing, and he detailed out his entire answer.
It's a soupy cauldron.
But as I listened to him, I created this word cloud of all the things, and there's one term that came out to me is people.
Yeah.
People that could solve a bunch of stuff, people who can consider this, people who have the experience. The people will drive your business forward, and that's what I heard from him.
Well distilled.
Yeah, exactly what I would have said. I think it comes down to the team, it comes down to the passion. Let's jump into some audience questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some great questions in the chat. Bernard, I think it's a great question. Are you bold enough to ask these in person? Do you want to ask the one about investors in Alberta?
Be helpful to introduce yourself.
Hi, Mira Damerji. I'm a product manager for Rapid Infection Diagnostics. It's a medtech company spin out of University of Calgary. So one of my questions was for Ricky. How do you see the situation across the border affect the Canadian biotech ecosystem?
The current administration, and it's one of the hardest things to model. Like I said, there are things that we can control and we know about, and there are things that we just can't.
So I think that, biotech is actually like any sector, it's a broad umbrella and you can divide it up in many different ways. And so I think as you start to educate the local community, local investor community, they can start to appreciate, okay, this is biotech and we're in this pillar of biotech. Okay, and now I understand what I'm looking at. And it just takes time, I think.
Yeah, thanks, panelists. Malcolm Eaton. I'm an innovation manager at the Tech Transfer Office at UFC, so thanks for the shout out. My question, we work at the kind of interface between hypothesis-driven science and I'll call it product market fit for now, but it's a little more complicated than that. My question is, in your positions, what questions do you ask in order to bridge the gap between those hypothesis-driven questions and the product market-driven questions?
This is for me?
Anyone, yeah.
I think it's hard to answer that question for many levels. One is, it depends if you're raising funds or not raising funds, right? So if you're raising funds, then the questions that investors are coming at you with drives what you try to do to address, which gets to the comment of, it's a waste of time to some extent once you start to play that game of whack-a-mole and trying to address all the different comments because you can. So if you go back to the lab every time you get some feedback, then you're distracting yourself from the true goal. And so I think that the challenge when you start to commercialize a product is to leave the hypotheses behind. Like, you've already settled the hypotheses to some extent because you think you have something commercializable. And now you have to start to ask commercializing questions. And so I think this is where academics, some can flip this switch better than others because there's always more science to do. And when investors come at you wanting more science, it takes a level of maturity to say, that's an interesting question, but we're not going to do that because we're doing this right now. And so I think that it's something that you can't ever leave the science, but that you have to now become quite focused in a way that it has to come secondary, actually. If that answers the question.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I'm from Belgium Export and Investment Agency, and I was wondering if have you ever tried to diversify your approach and to go to a more international approach for investment perspective, trying to collaborate, especially with the academic perspective where we have strong relations, and have you ever tried that way?
Yeah, we do. We're North American focused, but we are fortunate to see companies from around the world at a pretty high velocity. Much like we think, sick care and sickness is a global problem, we think innovation and ingenuity can come from anywhere in the world. We do have to stay in a lane. Our lane, and without any hubris, is helping to create market access and commercialization in the United States. My background is Toronto, born and raised in Canada. My family and friends are here. So we definitely want to see these advanced companies that are going to move upstream in the prevention and precision model for all humans, but in North America, because we're here and we know it. But in the US, we can start to validate how well this company can globally scale. And we just happen to be very plugged into payers, providers, pharma, device, consumer tech. I think the 4 segments that matter a lot in determining which companies are going to go forward. So yes, diversification on the portfolio is important. I think 6/9 of our portfolio are US. We have a Canadian, we have a UK, we have our first India company now as well. And they're going to tackle a problem in India that's a very global problem. Tackle it there first because that's what they know, and then we're going to bring them over here. So yeah, we're very supportive of that within reason. If we had to fly to board meetings every month, all parts of the world, we couldn't have efficiency. But fortunately, we don't have to do that. We can be on Zoom, and so it's a different paradigm now.
I'll flip it from an operator standpoint, which is to do anything meaningful in healthcare, life sciences, biotech in Canada, you absolutely incontrovertibly need to look globally for capital. There's just not enough here, and with respect to the Amplitude Ventures of the world and the Lumira Capitals and the Genesises and all these big groups that have capital, their funds are the size of what would be required to run a phase 2 clinical trial. There's no multi-billion-dollar venture capital fund in Canada that is investing in biotech life science. So you got to look globally. You got to look into Cambridge, Massachusetts. There's great groups out of Amsterdam and the UK, and I think you said Belgium. I'm not familiar with the Belgium market, but in Europe, there's some great groups that invest in biotech. And then importantly in Japan, the Japan conglomerates, the Big 10 conglomerates, have pharmaceutical companies, Mitsubishi, Tanabe, et cetera, et cetera. You just got to go spend the time and get to know them. And so I think to do anything meaningful, the CEO or the one in charge of fundraising has to be on the road, because it won't be possible to do it in Canada unless you're very lucky. And respect to whomever hears from the Alberta government who supported Entos and the Canadian government who put in, I think, about $77 million into an Alberta-based biotech company that has 4 or 5 clinical assets now. I think there's exceptions to the rule, but the rule itself it's very, very hard in Canada.
Sidebar note, fun fact, I almost invested in a frites company in Charleroi. I think that's in Belgium, yeah. It didn't happen, long story, but we should talk about it. It's fun. Not healthcare related.
I got a quick question from Ricky. Ricky, what's the wearables power ranking? What are your favorites?
The Aura, yeah, big advocate of the sleep ring. I have to be very careful in how I say this. I'm a big advocate for all of the sleep companies that are out there. Aura is definitely a market leader and doing some incredible stuff given their partnerships. But there's a lot of consumer companies that are entering into that space. But you asked me about power ranking for wearables as a whole.
As a whole,
I'll answer that question. Yeah, it's a good question. We get a lot. My office is just stacked with them. I'll answer that question in a slightly different way. I'm kind of more interested right now in the interstitial and the connective tissue that's going to allow me to take the information from all of them and make it meaningful. So we have a couple of assets that are in that space. Some are in stealth, so I can't talk too much about it. But I think the value and the power from this information, if you are a power user of your sleep ring, just as an example, you are going to benefit from it. The vast majority of people, unfortunately, that are in this sort of sick care paradigm, they're not power users of data. They're not power users of their health coaches telling them stuff. So I'm kind of excited about when things can be a little bit more invasive for the patient. Imagine your watch not vibrating because you've been lethargic for an hour, but of an alarm, a siren going off in your house and your television shutting off because you should just stand up and just move. I think we have to be a little bit more invasive before people can start to see the benefits of these things. Logging into your app is not good enough for most people, but I'm very excited that the data aggregation is there and that we can start to make create meaningful agents that can help us now get to that next stage. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, okay.
That may be the only way to pry me away from Love Island. So. I have one last question. Yeah, let's go here.
We heard a lot about the role of academia in biotech tonight, so I'm kind of interested in a more general question about the status there. Do you think that the way we have academia set up now is too inflexible? And do you think that that's been reinforced by the outside factors like the funding mechanisms?
You start.
So as the non-academic here, at Cyclica, very, very proud to say that our intention was to supercharge the way in which academics did a lot of their research. We had what's called Cyclica Academic Partnership Program, CAP. And within CAP, we would provide access to our technologies to do stuff like phenotypic screening, target deconvolution, multi-targeted drug discovery, and we had a very compatible, very institution-friendly arrangement with them, where we would fund out of our balance sheet all the work, and we would share 50% IP with the academic institution, right? Goal was scale, even if that was not always in our benefit. We just wanted the en masse. And I can tell you how difficult it was institution by institution to present a standardized approach to doing, commercial focused research. Across Canada, we left Canada with CAP with one agreement back in 2019, and we vowed never to come back. That was coast to coast. So we went to the US, and very quickly, the US was much more open-minded to the way in which they were going to partner with a company like us, from data sharing to asset sharing to monetization to adjusting their tech transfer agreements to something a little bit more avant-garde. And only after that did the Canadian institutions follow through on some of their previous commitments that they were standing by doing kumbaya on. And the University of Toronto, and I have a lot of respect for the University of Toronto, we spun out 2 companies from the University of Toronto, which took 2.5 years to spin out. And we're saying, we're gonna give you all the money. We're gonna do the work. We're gonna fund this downstream. All we need is this assay from that lab, and what other approach or business model would commercialize this way. And I remember, and I'll give you one anecdote, which happened December 2022. I'm sitting in Calgary over Christmas break, and we're talking with the VP of Tech Transfer at a Ontario-based non-U of T institution. And their tech transfer curmudgeon comes on the call and was like, this is how we do things here at this university. I'm like, okay, great, let's think a little bit differently. And they said, who do you think you are, Pfizer? And I knew my stuff. I said, no, we're not Pfizer, but when's the last time a big pharma company did any commercial arrangement with you? It's never happened. So don't throw that at me. And we got off the call. And so the reason I asked the question is because the University of Calgary has a really founder-friendly approach, which no other institution across Canada in life sciences has. The only other institution that is super founder-friendly is the University of Waterloo. You find it, you can go commercialize on it. So I think that fundamentally has to change, and I think there's a question about what can we do in Canada to seize the day with what's happening in the US, which is it's now our time to invest. Because there's all this research, this gap that is going to need to be filled. We ought to be filling this, we just need to get out of our own ways.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Very motivational ending. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Tech Thursday. Thank you, Nucleate. It's really awesome doing this panel. Feel free to keep the conversation going. I listen to you. And yeah, everyone have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Good job.